The Vikings, often romanticized in modern culture as ruthless sea raiders. Yes, they plundered, yes, they were ruthless, but that tells only part of the story. While post Roman Europe rebuilt, the Vikings emerged as something else entirely. In many ways, an anti empire. They were a force that didn't conquer through stable bureaucracies, but through mobility, audacity, and sheer adaptability. To call them lawless barbarians is to miss the depth of their world. They had structure, purpose, and a complex society that could be both brutal and sophisticated. Warriors? Absolutely. But also traders, explorers, settlers, storytellers, and perhaps most enduringly, transformers, able to reshape themselves to fit any land that they touched. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. If history is your thing, or you simply enjoy learning new topics, please consider giving us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. In this video, we'll journey through the Viking Age, a force that stretched far beyond their fjords and left its mark on empires, economies, and even our language. In the centuries following Rome's collapse, most of Europe was still recovering. Power shifted frequently between rival kingdoms, and the church embedded itself within each new political order, helping shape a fragile and fractured continent. But in the far north, in the harsh landscapes of Scandinavia, a different path was forming. Limited farmland, a growing population, and a fragmented tribal structure pushed people to look outward. Where much of Europe was focused on rebuilding within, the Scandinavians turned to the sea. The Viking Age burst onto the scene in 793 CE, with a shocking raid on the British monastery at Lindisfarne. Word spread quickly. Christian holy ground had been pillaged by pagan warriors from the sea. But for the Vikings, this wasn't about religion, it was about opportunity. Over the next several decades, Viking longships became a dreaded sight along the coasts and rivers of Europe. With speed and precision, they struck vulnerable targets. Undefended wealthy monasteries in England, possibly by legendary and questionably real Vikings such as Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons, settlements along the Frankish coastline by Siegfried, river trade hubs in Slavic lands, and even cities in Muslim and Christian Iberia. Their hit-and-run tactics made them almost impossible to stop, gone with the prize before defenders could even react. As the Viking raids wore on, both sides began to adapt. Some European rulers paid the Danegeld, a tribute meant to buy peace, though this often only encouraged further raids. Others fortified their coasts or pushed back militarily, forcing the Vikings to rethink their approach. Gradually, raids shifted toward permanence. Drawn by fertile soil, strategic value, or simply the space to expand, the Norse began settling new lands. Many of these territories, like the Faroe Islands, Orkney, Shetlands, and Iceland, were sparsely, if at all, populated. In other places, like Dublin, Viking control was established quickly yet brutally, turning the city into a vital hub. Some settlements, however, came after years of struggle and diplomacy. In England, Alfred the Great's victory at Edington in 878 forced the Vikings and their warlord Guthrum into a treaty granting them control over the island's north and east, territory that became known as the Danelaw. In West Francia, Rollo, who had frequently raided lands along the Seine, was eventually granted land in 911, laying the foundation for what would become Normandy. And in the Slavic East, where the Eastern Vikings, known as Varangians, may have even been invited to restore order, they established the Kievan Rus under Rurik, their Swedish prince. Influence, however, was not a one-way street, and mainland European institutions, particularly Christianity and centralized governance, began flowing north. By the mid to late 10th century, once scattered tribal factions in Scandinavia began consolidating into kingdoms. In Denmark, kings like Gorm the Old and his son Harald Bluetooth laid the foundations of the realm. In Norway, following brief consolidation under Harald Fairhair and his son Eric Bloodaxe, two Olafs, Tryggvason and Haraldsson, more permanently united the land under one crown. And in Sweden, Eric the Victorious and his son Olaf Skotkonung merged the Swedes and the Geats into a single kingdom. And with these kingdoms came the church. While many kings adopted Christianity out of political pragmatism, within a generation or two, their kingdoms looked more like their southern Christian neighbors than their own pagan ancestors. By the early 11th century, Norse power even spread beyond Scandinavia itself. In 1013, after decades of raids and shifting alliances, Sweyn Forkbeard, king of Denmark, successfully conquered England. His son, Canute the Great, would later add Norway to his domain, creating the short-lived but powerful North Sea Empire. By the 1030s, the Viking world had been fundamentally reshaped. Once feared sea raiders, the Norse had become Christian monarchs, integrated into the order they had once disrupted. Through early raids, gradual settlements, and the rise of kingdoms, one Viking trait remained constant: exploration. Whether performing reconnaissance along the British coast, testing the waters of the North Atlantic, or simply sailing west in search of new lands, the Norse were not afraid to boldly go where no one had gone before. By the mid-9th century, they had found and settled the Shetlands and Faroe Islands. By 930, Ingolfur Arnarsson had established a thriving colony in Iceland with a population of up to 25,000, even establishing the Althing, widely considered the oldest surviving parliament in the world. When Eric the Red was exiled from Iceland around 980, he didn't return to Norway. He pushed further west and settled Greenland. And when his son, Leif Erikson, heard tales of lands beyond that, he sailed across the Atlantic and made landfall in North America, a place they called Vinland. To the Vikings, boundaries, cultural, technological, and geographical, weren't obstacles. They were invitations. These so-called quote-unquote barbarians were consummate explorers, setting a standard for bold discovery centuries before exploration became the calling card of European empires. By the mid-11th century, the Vikings had planted their seeds across continents and oceans, and with few new lands to raid or settle, the Viking world was ready to call it a day. Their tribes had become kingdoms, their kings were Christian, and their explorers had intermarried with the Gaelic, Anglo-Saxon, Frankish, Byzantine, and Slavic peoples, cementing a lineage still seen today. While the raiders of old were no longer seen as a persistent threat, their influence could be felt from Constantinople to North America. Their last major chapter came in 1066, when Harald Hardrada, king of Norway, made a final ambitious play for the English throne. After early victories in North Britain, his army was caught off guard at the Battle of Stamford Bridge by Harold Godwinson. Hardrada was killed in the fighting, and with him died the last great Viking bid for conquest. The Viking Age was over. From its first strike at Lindisfarne to its last stand just 150 miles south, the Viking Age stretched nearly 300 chaotic, often brutally violent, but deeply transformative years. It was never just about plunder or conquest. It was about curiosity, movement, and adaptation. The Vikings, for all their ferocity, were agents of change, pressuring the societies they touched to bend, evolve, and ultimately emerge stronger. Their stories, chronicled by the kingdoms they once raided and romanticized in sagas and runestones, still stir the imagination, and perhaps, if nothing else, they remind us to keep looking outward, to keep exploring. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this recap of the Viking Age both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.